Welcome to America's Unexplained, your gateway to paranormal, mysterious, and supernatural events, extraordinary stories, and investigations into the unknown. Every mystery has an answer, and someone, somewhere, just may know that answer. Perhaps that someone is you. Hello, my name is Jeremy. In the early 80s, when I was a preteen, I went hunting with my dad and Uncle Merle in the piney woods about 75 miles southeast of Shreveport, Louisiana. This was the day I saw Bigfoot watching me through the trees. Here's my story. The first 23 years of my life were spent in a little North Louisiana town called Saline. Our families were avid hunters in those days, and one hunting trip made me think twice about going back into the woods. From our house, it was about 1/2 mile to the Mill Creek Bridge and the turnoff road that we would take for about another mile to get to our favorite hunting spot called the Lower Bluffs. This cool early fall Saturday of squirrel season was just like all the rest, or so I thought it would be. This time, my father, my Uncle Merle, and I were out squirrel hunting and looking for signs of deer. Now I have to point this out. I never once saw or heard of my Uncle Merle going squirrel hunting and coming up empty-handed, except for this day. We drove to the end of the dirt road and parked. My dad would always leave the keys on top of the passenger side front tire just in case of an emergency. After getting everything ready, Uncle Merle took the trail to the left, my dad and I took the trail on the right. About 20 to 30 yards down either trail, there was a 45-degree bluff that would take us to the bottom. From the top of the bluff, you could see hundreds of yards in any direction, and it was a beautiful view. Once Dad and I reached the bottom, he told me to hunt in this area and he would continue on to the right. This way, I would be between the two of them, and I was comfortable with that. But after he got out of sight, I started noticing that things didn't feel as they normally did. I didn't know if it was just in my head or not, so I tried to brush it off. That's when I noticed the only thing I could hear was the soft sounds of the creek waters trickling around the bend. There were no birds singing, no breeze moving through the trees. Everything was completely quiet. I continued sneaking around the woods looking for squirrels and signs of deer, but I found nothing. It didn't take me long and I was getting bored, so I headed back to the truck. Once I reached the top of the bluff, I noticed a tree to my right, and its roots were stretched out as if it was meant to be a chair. So I decided to sit down and watch that area a little longer. That position allowed me to see the entire bottoms around me, and it was very comfortable for a little while. I finally decided that I had had enough, so I headed on back to the truck. This time, my dad had forgotten to leave the keys, so I looked down the road and spotted a perfect tree stump to sit on. I knew they'd be coming back soon. Now, I don't know how long I'd been sitting there, but suddenly I started smelling something terrible that wasn't there earlier. As I looked up, my eyes focused on something standing between two trees on the edge of the bluff about 50 feet from the right of where I'd been sitting earlier. I noticed these two trees earlier, and they looked strange. About 4 to 6 inches off the ground, they split into two trees forming a V, with each of the trunks being about 12 to 14 inches thick. What made them look strange was one was broken off about 5 feet or so from the ground, and the other was broken off about a foot or so higher. There must have been about 3 feet between the tops of the V-shaped trees. They looked like a tornado or something had ripped them off years earlier. Now, I couldn't tell what I was looking at, but it seemed to be using the trees to hold itself up. It looked as if one of its hands was on the top of either of the trees, and it seemed to be rocking back and forth ever so slightly. I kept watching whatever it was, trying to figure something out, trying to come to a conclusion of what it was I was seeing. At one point, I even raised my 16-gauge Mossberg shotgun up and aimed it towards that area. Now I knew that it was too far away for me to even hit what it was, but I did it anyway. After a couple of minutes, I closed my eyes and lowered my head as I was trying to figure this thing out. What was I seeing? When I opened my eyes, whatever it was had vanished. That's when panic set in. I didn't know where it was or what it was. That's when I yelled to my dad as loud as I possibly could. I heard him whistle back with our signal, so I could tell he was coming up the bluffs toward me. I met him at the truck and insisted that he open the truck so we could get in as fast as we could. Within a minute or two, Uncle Merle came out of the woods too. By this time, Dad had the truck turned around. I opened the door so Uncle Merle could jump in, and we got out of there as fast as we could. They could see the worry on my face and tried to get me to open up and tell them what happened, but I wouldn't. I waited until we were back on the main road before I told them what I'd seen, but they didn't say a single word. They just raised a little bit and looked at each other, and both of them had the strangest look on their faces I can ever remember. Like I said earlier, this was the only time my uncle came home from squirrel hunting empty-handed. And it's been about 40 years now since that day, and I haven't stepped foot in those woods since. Neither of us had ever said anything else about that day until last year after my uncle had passed away. Dad and I were talking about our fun times hunting with him, and I brought that day up. That was the first time my dad finally opened up to me and told me about something he had seen. He worked in Shreveport and drove the 150-mile round trip daily. Late one night on his way home, just as he was approaching the Mill Creek Bridge about a half a mile from our home, his headlights shined on something tall and black running across the road. At first, he brushed it off thinking it was a black bear, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized it wasn't a bear. This thing was running on two legs, just like a man, and the top of his head was taller than the top of his truck cab. He told me that he had mentioned it to one of his old high school buddies, Reggie, on the way back to work the next morning. To his shock, Reggie told him that he too had seen something in that area that fit that description, and it scared him so much that he refused to ever go hunting again. After talking for a little while, and hearing all of this, we both came to the same conclusion. We had all seen a Bigfoot. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you're enjoying these stories as much as I am. Be sure to hit the like button so we know that you like these kinds of stories, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a single exciting podcast. If you've ever seen something you can't explain, share it with me and I'll share your story here. You can stay anonymous if you wish. Email your story to me today at AmericasUnexplainedPodcast@gmail.com.